children and the grandparents that lived in the property that we've been talking about. This is an enlargement that I took from the property appraiser's website, and you've got that in tab 1 in your notebook that I provided with you. My client's home is right here, right on State Road 66. It's right on the property line, and the proposed tower is going in this square right here, which is approximately the scale. They're talking about 100 square feet, 260-foot tall tower, standalone tower with a 7-foot chain link fence topped by barbed wire. And just to give you some perspective, this property, the 26 acres we're talking about, not only has my client, but some residents over here. The owner of the property doesn't just own this, the owner actually owns this entire strip all the way down there. And as we heard from the prior meeting before the planning board from Mr. Hutchinson, when he was asked by one of the planning board members, why did y'all choose that spot? It had nothing to do with technical issues or what was the best place to place it for purposes of cell phones, but simply, well, that's where the owner wanted it because it's way on the other side of the property where there's a bunch of dead trees. It is exactly 260 feet from the property line, so they pushed it back as far as they possibly could. They couldn't have got it much closer. They're under 300 feet from my client's property, but they also have all this property, and I think the owners live right in this middle area where they also could have placed the tower, but they chose this one. Only because they just didn't want it near them. They wanted it over by where the dead trees are. And that makes sense logically from their perspective, but it doesn't make sense, obviously, from my clients. Before they put it there was no consultation with my clients, and as far as I'm aware, with anyone else. It would have been a simple matter if they just come, because there aren't that many people there. They could have done it in an afternoon and just said, look, you know, we're wanting to put a tower, you have any input in this? And I think they could have worked something out. We had this 2 weeks ago, and in the 2 weeks since then, apparently they've talked with the owner and they're amenable to moving it some. We've not heard about that yet. They've made no contact with us yet about whether they want to move it and how much they want to move it and so forth. Any discussion about moving across the street over in this area where it wouldn't bother anybody, and it's more than 1,000 feet from everybody. So, that being said, the standard, of course, is based on section 7.13.03, which is in tab 2 of your document that I provided with you. And I've highlighted some of the more important areas, and I'll try to skip to the, cut to the chase here. There are 3 main areas. One of them is property values, which is something that Mr. Sini has already addressed, and there are 3 articles at tabs 7, 8, and 9 that talk about the fact that it does affect property values. It's unanimous that it affects property values. I couldn't find any study that said it didn't. And I would also talk about, you asked about factors that would influence how much it would affect it. Now, consider, for example, high populated areas, Tampa, Orlando, and places like that, where you've got dense population, lots of large buildings, lots of things on the skyline, where a cell tower is not as likely to stand out. We're talking about a structure here that is essentially a 25-story building, or is the equivalent of a 25-story building with nothing around it except a couple of dead and dying orange trees. Nothing to obstruct my client's view of that. And so, and you can see it from miles away, I would assume. So I think that has a more significant impact here than it would if we were, say, talking about Orlando, Tampa, even Lakeland, where you've got a lot of high rises and large buildings. There's nothing out there anywhere near this large or this obvious. So I think that's going to affect the value as well, more significantly than it would in the other places. There's the health and safety issues, and I understand, Mr. Thompson, I agree with you that for the most part, the issue of EMF and radio frequency, the studies pretty much are in line saying that, at least as far as I can tell from the short term, they don't cause any serious health risks. These all come with a caveat, of course, that says that we don't really know the long-term effects because this is basically a 20-year-old technology, cell phones. We won't know for another 10 or 20 years whether it has long-term effects, but be that as it may, as Mr. Sini said, when it comes to property values, perception is everything. It may or may not be a health risk, but if you've got a young family out there, they're going to look at that, and you're going to have a hard time convincing them don't worry about it, we've got studies that say it's not a risk. So I think it's still an issue that needs to be addressed when you're trying to determine whether these things should be placed there. There's another issue, the issue of tower collapse, and I know they touched on that, and it is apparently, and I'll take their word for it, that it is designed in a way so that it basically breaks apart and falls down within the 100-yard area, or certainly within the 260-yard. The problem is, in a real world situation, when you've got a hurricane or a tornado, things don't just fall down straight down. I mean, you've got a 260-foot tall javelin next door, and if a tornado knocks it down, it's not just gonna collapse where it is, it's gonna be blown around, and they're right there below it. It wouldn't take much of a gust of wind to throw it right on top of their house. So this is another reason why distance is important, and rather than jamming it into the closest corner they could where the clients are, they would feel much more comfortable raising children where they didn't have that risk every time a big storm came around. Now, the last issue, and again, I'm going to refer you to the standards of review for special exceptions in 171303, and it has to do with aesthetics and quality of life. One of the issues is whether it creates a mixture of land uses so dissimilar to the existing pattern of development that the overall quality and character of the surrounding neighborhood would be degraded. This is a rural area, and one of the reasons people live in rural areas, the appeal of a rural area is that you can just get back to the natural beauty of the land. You get away from the crowded streets. It's open, it's natural. You can look out your door and see trees and streams and orange groves, whatever, without having to be reminded of the excesses of a large city. Or in this case, a really huge 260-foot eyesore of modern technology that really doesn't need to be there. And bear in mind, it doesn't have to be at that location. It can be moved any number of places. And this is another very important point that I think Mr. Thompson touched on early on, is this is just going to be an increasing problem for the county. Mr. Hutchinson testified at the prior meeting that as things stand now, the current technology with 4G technology, the cell phone towers need to be within about 5 miles of each other to cover the reception. With 5G technology, which is coming up, he testified that it would be more like 2.5 miles. So this is going to come up more and more and more, and it's going to take a lot of careful planning and a careful placement to prevent this county, particularly the rural areas, from looking like a pincushion. So I think it's very important when they're in Tampa, it doesn't bother them. I think they need to be more careful and more neighborly, if you will, since they're not going to be here, to take into effect how it's going to impact the people that actually live here, particularly those that live in the shadow of these objects. One of the other issues that comes up in 713 is whether all steps have been taken by the developer to minimize the adverse effects. And I don't mean to jump on them, but they didn't do anything to minimize the effects because they just placed it as close as they could to my client's home. There are many ways to mitigate the effects of this, including moving it to the owner's property on the other side of 60, where there's so much more room to place something like this in an area where there are trees, no residences, even away from the roads, so the passers-by aren't struck with this huge structure out in the middle of nowhere as well. And finally, whether the detrimental effects of any identified incompatibilities can be mitigated or eliminated by adequate buffering. And again, we're talking about a buffer of distance. The more distance we have, I think the greater you satisfy everybody. I don't think when we're talking about buffers in this case, you can talk about a wall or a hedgerow or something like that. One's not going to block it. And two, my clients don't want to look at a wall or hedgerow right on the property line either. They want to see the open spaces that they bought this property for. So with that in mind, I think that going forward, there is plenty of justification for this board to deny the special exception, with the caveat, don't get me wrong, my clients want cell phone coverage out there. Everybody does, not just for convenience, but because there's a safety issue. 911 calls, we think is important to spread the cell phone net as wide as we can for the protection and safety of the general public. But it should be done in a way that's more conscientious, that not only protects the public, Well, it protects the quality of life in Hardy County, protects the landscape, and also protects the property values, which will be adversely affected if these are just thrown willy-nilly wherever the landowners wish them to be placed. And thank you for your time.